Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to our final chapter before the test, Chapter 10, discussing on crafting the brand positioning. We talked about the last chapter, Chapter 9, when we talked about the process of segmentation and targeting. This last chapter is going to talk about how we create a unique position for our particular brand and our products. And if I were to come and call up these particular brands, I would be safe to say that every one of you probably has a unique idea or unique place in the mind of each one of these particular brands. So if I just say Southwest Airlines, those of you who just absolutely love Southwest, who love to fly it, my brother's one of those who loves to fly Southwest. I mean, it has a unique place relative to the competition, relative to American, Delta, you name it. They just have a unique place. For those of you who enjoy Starbucks, Starbucks is your number one, and everything else in the world is number two. And whether, I don't mean for it to come out like that. Anyway, what that means is that Starbucks is just your preferred brand to the exclusion of all others. Now, you might enjoy other coffee, but nothing certainly to the level that you enjoy Starbucks, especially if you enjoy going to the Starbucks stores. And I mean, then you're basically encompassing the entire experience. Of course, Google and their ability to do searches, even if you do not like Google as a brand in general, if you're doing some searches, there's some things that Google as a search engine that does in a superior fashion to anything else. And if you look at the bottom, Cadillac has a unique position that they have in the American automobile driver's mind, and has had that for decades and decades. BMW is one of those unique brands, especially in automobiles, and we're going to talk about them because they exist in the straddle position. They straddle themselves as both a luxury brand and a performance brand as well. And then finally LG, which has had a unique rebranding over its history. LG started out as Gold Star, and they were a manufacturer in the 90s of technology and electronics. Did a horrible job. I mean, their equipment was not that good. I don't know if any of you remember Gold Star. They bought the corporation called Lucky in 2000, and in the merging, they rebranded themselves as Lucky Gold Star, or LG. LG has had a significant upgrade. As a matter of fact, from 2006 to 2010, I believe it was, they were the number one sold electronics brand in the United States, or excuse me, in the world. So it had a very venerated position. Okay, so all of these unique brands, and they all have this unique place in our minds. How do they get that way? Well, it isn't by magic. Basically, it's through the act of what is known as brand positioning. Okay? So, brand positioning is the act of designing a company's offering and its image so that it occupies a unique place in the minds of the target market. And I want to add one more phrase in here. Relative to the competition. Okay? I want you to think of wanting to occupy a particular place in the consumer's mind, but it's important to understand that you want to occupy that position in a unique place, not in the same place as another brand. Because if you're in the same position as another brand in the consumer's mind, they're only going to find one way to make a choice, and that's by price. And so the whole process of positioning means that you create a unique idea, a special concept that is not like any of the others, okay? And so generally one of the processes and the results of positioning is usually that you will successfully create the concept of a customer-focused value proposition. And what the value proposition is a cogent reason why the target market should buy your product or service. Okay? The value proposition is a cogent reason. This is the customer-focused value proposition, is a cogent reason why your customers or the target market should buy your product or service. And generally that has to do in one way or another with support, performance, or superiority based upon relative to your competition. Okay? Excuse me. All right. So, this chapter is going to be talking about what's the nuts and bolts that we go about creating that. And we'll talk about some of the processes, usually the top 3 in which we can do this. You can use these particular processes in your own businesses. And trust me, folks, businesses have been doing this for a long time, and they work very well, okay? So that end result of creating this value proposition, if we were just to look at a few of them, we would look at a value proposition of perhaps Hertz, which is a fast, convenient way to rent the right type of car at an airport. Now, if I were to say Enterprise would have a completely different value proposition based upon its target customers. The target customers of Enterprise are actually suburbanites who need to have a second car, usually because they have some difficulties with their current automobile. It is not by happenstance that enterprises are generally located in the suburbs. They, of course, are by airports as a design as well. But the target customers of Enterprise are different than Hertz. They do the same thing, but based upon the target customers, you have a different value proposition. And so if I were to next say Volvo, the number one word every time it comes out of the mouth when you talk about Volvo is always going to be safety, especially for families. And so given that their target is families, number one is always going to be safety. Domino's are always going to be for those people who are convenience-minded. They built their brand around the fact that they deliver their pizza in less than 30 minutes. It's kind of a unique thing if you think about pizza in general. I don't know how many pizza places that are around where you live, but here in Boone, I can think of at least 8 different places that serve pizza in one way or another, and at least 6 of them do deliveries. However, how can a town of any size support 8 different pizza places? Well, it's possible because each one of those has a different target customer, and each one of those has a different value proposition. How we craft that brand and how we create the position goes a long way in establishing a successful, obtainable customer base. Okay, so how do we go about designing our value proposition, and how do we go about looking at our positioning in general? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to be able to have an understanding of the industry, that group of like-minded businesses in which we cluster around, have an understanding of them, and basically get a determination of who all that we actually compete with. And that definition is what's known as the competitive frame of reference. So the competitive frame of reference basically defines all of the brands that the brand competes with and should be a focus of our competitive analysis, who those individual other corporations that we define as being in the same consumer market. Okay? Now, they can be direct competitors. In other words, they are directly looking at the same individuals. So if I were to say perhaps Pizza Hut, and I were to say Domino's, even closer, if I were to say Papa John's and Domino's, those are 2 direct pizza delivery places. Those would be direct competitors. However, you also have to look at what's also called the generic competitors as well, who compete in the broad category of home delivery of foods. And so that would be other competitors that they would have. Okay? Well, if I'm going to define my competitive frame of reference, I need to at least basically determine what we call category membership. All right? Category membership are the products or sets of products with which the brand competes with and functions as close substitutes. Okay? We define those as the products or set of products in which a brand competes with and function as close substitutes. That is the competitive frame of reference. Now, it is also important to understand that we wish to be included in any competitive frame of reference, especially if we are considered in the same group, because if we're not, then we're not part of the consumer's consideration set. In other words, they won't consider us versus others, okay? And so the competitive frame of reference is important for us to be able to establish, to know exactly those particular products that we compete against and what are the attributes of those given products, okay? And just remember this, we define competitors as companies that satisfy the same customer need. So I'm drinking a Mountain Dew right now, all right? Now, the competitive frame of reference that Mountain Dew might have, it could be 7-Up if you're looking at clear drinks. If you're looking at Coke, if you're looking at soft drinks as a generic category, and especially if you're looking at sugary and high caffeine drinks, this is where Mountain Dew would be. All of those would be considered in the category reference. One moment. Okay, so how do we define ourselves relative to our competition? Okay? Well, the way we do this is that we have two unique ways to categorize our goods. One is called points of parity, and the other is called points of difference. All right? So let's talk about those one at a time. And this actually likes to talk about points of difference first. I want to talk first about points of parity, okay? So, the first thing is we want to be able to announce category membership, in essence to state that this particular good is an equal to any of the other goods that they consider to be competition. This is what's known as the points of parity. The points of parity are those attributes and benefit associations that are not necessarily unique and may be shared with other brands, and in essence considered minimum standards in order to be accepted as a brand or as a competitor in this particular category. All right? And so an example of that would be beer. All right? A point of parity of beer, the most important, there's so many different beers out there, is that it has to taste great. All right? It has to taste good. There is really no other reason to drink beer. Well, I mean, there are other reasons to drink beer, but that may be the most important attribute of all. And so a point of parity with all beer is that if you're going to compare beer, the first thing that you have to do is that you have to be able to, in essence, have at least that one unique thing. A brand can break even in those areas wherever else it could be at a disadvantage of, as long as it at least tastes great. Okay, so that's one of the things you want to be able to. If you're coming out with a product, you want to be able to announce category membership by noting the points of parity where it is equal to your competition. Okay? And so, what are the points of parity forms, or those associations that are important for parity. The first is that it has to be part of a given category. And so what that means, that those are attributes and benefits that consumers consider essential to a legitimate offering. All right? And so if I'm going to drink a beer, okay, I want to have an excellent taste. Yes, generally I'm going to want it to be alcohol related. All right? Generally beer needs to be cool or cold. Doesn't always have to be, but I would consider those to be category attributes and benefits that would make that acceptable. Okay? Correlational means that not only will it have the positive benefits, but sometimes it'll have the negative benefits as well, okay? Negative attributes, I should say, all right? There may be some negative associations that arise with it, but basically it means that the attributes correlate to each other, okay? And then the final thing is that they have competitive associations that are designed to overcome perceived weaknesses. Okay, so in other words, in other words, you have unique things about your particular brand that kind of make up, in light of your competitors' differences, it still makes it okay. So like if I'm going back to light beer, it doesn't have the thick, deep taste of a lager, but that necessarily is not a bad thing. It could also be considered a good thing if you're not wanting a heavy beer. All right? So those are the points of parity. Okay? Now, going back up, we're going to talk about the points of difference. Okay? Now, the points of difference are those attributes and benefits that consumers strongly associate with your brand. They positively evaluate them, and they believe that they could not be found in a competitive brand. And so the points of difference are considered positive attributes, ones that make them unique. And the other thing that's important with points of difference is that they're not easily transferable to other brands. All right? So I have points of parity, which announce I'm just like most of the products that are in this particular category, such as beer. But I have points of difference, which make this particular brand unique and not found in any of the other competitors in that category. Okay? So, where we had the 3 C's for the points of parity, we have the 3 D's when it's considered the points of difference. Okay? And so the points of different criteria are desirable, deliverable, and differentiating. Okay? So desirable means is that the particular benefits are personally relevant, that the consumers desire to see those particular things. Okay? The next is that it's deliverable, that you can create and maintain those brand associations and deliver the benefits that allegedly this particular brand, that this good has. And then the next is that it's differentiating, that it is unique, distinctive, and superior to the competition. Okay? So, it means this. It means that a good brand or a good position starts with a foundation where it says this good is part of this particular category. But because of some other unique attributes, this make it unique, special, and desirable. All right? So, it's important also to understand is that many times you will have multiple frames of reference. In other words, that depending on whoever the competitor is that you might find is that in one category membership, it might be considered one unique thing, when compared to other competitors, it might have a completely different frame of reference. Now, as I talked about with BMW as a brand before, I also talked about that they had the straddle position. Straddle position basically means is that you hold basically more than one points of parity and points of difference. And so the straddle position for BMW has always been not only that it is a luxury brand and it competes in the luxury category, but it is also in the performance brand, in the performance category. And so what this means is that instead of having an undifferentiated or a concentrated form of marketing, it means that with the same product, you can actually compete in two different product categories. And that is the power of a straddle position. If you can, in essence, excel in this, straddle positions are very valuable. Okay? So, let me now go on and kind of discuss one of the brands that did this better than anything else. And they're showing light beer, and for those of you who may not necessarily know the history of light beer, low-calorie beer or light beer, whichever you prefer, has always been one of those difficulties that beer manufacturers have attempted to find a market for in the United States. And it has never, well, before the advent of light beer, it never really was able to do successfully. Several reasons. Once again, if you consider the position of what low-calorie beer is, the first thought of where low-calorie beer is that if you're looking at the 50s and 60s in the United States, low-calorie beer was thought to appeal to women. All right? Well, the problem with that is that 2/3 of the beer drinkers in the United States are predominantly males. And so it is a limiting of the ultimate market, is that if it only appeals to one particular group. And so low-calorie beer has always been one of those difficult things to market in the U.S. And so what Miller tried to do was they tried to rebrand their low-calorie beer by, instead of calling it low-calorie beer, they called it light beer, L-I-T-E. They did not use the word L-I-G-H-T on purpose because the association of a light beer was considered a non-sell item. Okay? So, how are they going to be able to do this? Well, the first thing that they needed to do was create a discussion or a advertisement which basically stated the category membership of light beer. In other words, the attributes and benefits and associations that are not unique to the brand but need to be shared in the brand, that has to be spoken first. And so with light beer, the important thing for it to say is it tastes great. That's the point of parity. Now, what makes it different is that it has 1/3 less calories than the regular beer. Now, the difficulty with trying to sell a brand that had 1/3 less calories than their regular beer is coming up with a way of announcing those category benefits without making it sound like a low-calorie beer. So this is what Miller did. They stated that they did state that it had fewer calories, but they used the brand mantra, less filling. Okay? Now, I want you to think of this. If a brand or a beer is less filling and you're a beer drinker, what does it imply that you're going to do? If a brand is less filling, it means you can drink more. Okay? The calorie content will be less. The alcohol content will be the same because that's the way you brew beer. Okay? But what it means is that you get to drink more beer to get the same calories. So they started with points of parity, great taste, and then points of difference, less filling. And then they came up with one of those great brand mantras that you just love, and we'll talk about mantras in a minute. They came up with a slogan that said, light beer from Miller, everything you always wanted in a beer. Category membership, points of parity, and less points of difference. Okay? So, to kind of give you an idea how they were going to pull this off was they wanted to be able to use symbols that men would be comfortable with. And so what they did is they used retired football players mostly, but they used retired athletes everywhere. And these are the individuals who in essence became the spokesmen for light beer. And so to me, probably the best of all of these that I've seen is those that have to do with two former football players by the name of Dick Butkus and Bubba Smith. And so Dick Butkus was named a linebacker of the 60s. He actually only had something like an 8-year career, I believe, but he was an 8-time All-Pro. He was known as one of the hardest, toughest men to ever play the game. And Bubba Smith, who was the gentleman who was with him, was known as one of the greatest defensive ends in history. They used to have a sign in Baltimore's stadium saying "Kill Bubba Kill," which is like a relationship to an old Johnny Quest show. Anyway, going on. These men are respected and known as being famous in their category, and these are the people that became the pitchmen for light beer. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the commercials. I got 3 of these, but let me also say there was dozens of men that pitched this. Okay, but I want you to listen for the points of parity and the points of difference, and in humor try to get what they're going to be saying. Okay, all right, so.
We're not just a couple of animals who can only play football. We can be civilized, too.
Tennis is sophisticated, but you still got to be fast on your feet. So we still drink light beer from Miller. It's got a third less calories than the regular beer, and it's less filling.
And it really tastes great.
Now that we played singles, we're looking for a nice, friendly game of doubles.
Tennis, anyone?
Ooh-wee. Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
Did you hear all of the it's got a third less calories in their than in their less beer, and it really tastes great, and it's less filling, okay? And then the tagline, everything you always wanted in a beer and less. Well, this became such a hit that they did a couple more commercials, and then they add a little bit of humor, which humor always works. And so this is Mr. Smith and Mr. Butkus, not so famous polo players.
I tell you, playing polo is a lot tougher than it looks.
Sure is.
And even though the horses do the running, you still can work up the thirst.
So after a chucker or two, we equestrians drink light beer from Miller.
Yeah, light tastes great, and it's got a third less calories than the regular beer.
And it's less filling.
And that's important, because tomorrow we're going to try our hand at water polo.
Yeah, I sure hope those horses can swim.
Me too.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer. And less.
Yeah, they have a way of freezing an audience. You don't want to laugh too much at them. One more, and then I'm going to go on. And so this is them again, one last time.
I'll tell you, trying to get cultured isn't easy. We just went to the opera and we didn't understand a word.
Yeah, but that big guy in those tights sure could sing.
Well, at least we still drink a very civilized beer. Light beer from Miller. Light tastes great.
But us impresarios drink it because it's less filling.
We can't afford to get filled up. Tomorrow night, we're going to the ballet.
Yeah, I sure hope they do it in English.
Me too.
Light beer from Miller. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less.
So, there you go. Some pretty good humor. I mean, and the other part of that is, quite simply, did they nail it? Yeah, they nailed it. Light beer basically has an established place, even now, in the minds and hearts of individuals. And I like light beer, and I drink it as much for them maybe as for anything else. It's been a brilliant campaign. The crazy thing is that they abandoned all of the symbolism of light beer. They went away from the labels, and then they're trying to recover everything that they had lost. Brilliant way of doing it. Okay? All right. So we're going to move on. So, once again, we have the points of parity, we have the points of difference, and now the way, as I've talked about, what we want to do is we want to discuss about how it all pulls together, and that's the concept of brand mantras, okay? A brand mantra, like great taste, less filling, is a 3 to 5 word articulation of the heart and the soul of the brand. You can call it the brand promise or the brand essence. And what they've done with light beer from Miller, what they did so well, perhaps maybe one of the better ones ever done, was that they communicated in just 4 words the promise of light beer. Great taste, less filling, okay? So what makes brand mantras valuable is if they can do 3 things. If they can communicate and clarify what is unique about the brand, all right? And so great taste, less filling contradicts everything that low-calorie beer is supposed to be about, okay? It simplifies it, and also in the simplification, the brand mantra is memorable. Great taste, less filling. Everything you've always wanted in a beer, but less, okay? And then the last is that the brand mantra should stake a ground that is personally meaningful and relevant. And not only that, but it inspires the employees inside the organizations too, okay? And so this is the essence, of having a good brand and a good position. And so, how do you do this, or how do you establish the position? Basically, what is the nuts and bolts when you figure these things out? So this is the way you do it, okay? The first thing you do is you announce the category benefits of this particular item. And so you ensure that the brand is going to deliver these things, okay? If this is a new product out, you want to be able to compare with exemplars. You're not afraid of being in the same room with your competitors. As a matter of fact, if you position yourself in the same room with your competitors, you're thought of as being equal to your competitors as well, okay? And then finally, what you want to be able to do is in the product descriptor in itself, you allow it to have some kind of concise means of conveying its category. Light beer from Miller. Okay, so having said all of that, we have to make sure that when we're communicating is that we're using the right words, okay? And that we have to make sure that when we're doing positive attributes and benefits, that we look out for the negatively correlated attributes and benefits. So if we're ever going to talk about low price, we must always ensure that the category membership includes good quality, all right? So low price, high quality, you've got to be able to answer both of those. Great taste versus low calories. It's powerful versus being safe. It is not only ubiquitous, which means everywhere, but it's also exclusive. And then varied versus simple. Okay? All right. So once we start measuring how well we're going to be doing, then how do we go about monitoring how well we're doing in relative to the competition? Well, there's 3 ways of being able to measure how well we're doing. The one is the share of market. And so what is your competitor's share of the total market? And is it the share of the market that directly you wish to have? Okay. Now, it is very possible for you to carve out a very satisfying position with just a narrow base, and you're happy with that. The next is the concept of share of mind, and this is the percentage of customers who would name their competitor in the statement, name the first company that comes to mind in the industry. Okay, and so who comes to mind first is what's known as share of mind. And then the last, which is probably the more difficult one, is the share of the heart. And the share of the heart is those people who respond to the statement, name the company from which you prefer to buy. Now, how well do you do stacked up against those helps you to determine just how powerful the competitors are in your category and how you can possibly find a way of making your product unique. Now, we talked about positioning and its power and all of those other statements as well. I also, before I go on, I wanted to talk about one other thing, and that is the concept of repositioning. Now, repositioning isn't necessarily talked about in your book, but the fact we're talking about it now, I think it needs to have its due right now. Well, as Jag Sheth has said, marketing is a context-driven discipline, and as the context changes, the way we think about our brands and our products changes as well. And so it is important many times when we have a brand that has crafted a certain brand position that, given the context of where consumers are, we may have to change those things. And so, having said that, for those of you who know the Cadillac brand, who know something of its history, you'd be surprised at where Cadillac came from, especially if you were to look at it during the 60s. So I'm going to show you first a commercial that was in 1974. This is a Cadillac Fleetwood Talisman. And I want you to kind of absorb your feeling of what Cadillac was. And this is right at the peak of its brand vision in the 70s, okay?
America's #1 luxury car is Cadillac. #1 by more than double in sales and popularity. Cadillac offers for 1974 the leadership cars of the land. Cadillac 74 is #1 in choice, with 9 different models, plus luxury versions never before available, like the Fleetwood Talisman. Historically #1 in owner loyalty, Cadillac now offers its owners even greater luxury in interior appointments and a new concept in instrument panel design. And traditionally, #1 in resale value, Cadillac adds even finer engine performance from start to stop. A new high-energy ignition system is available. There's a new level of quiet and rolling smoothness that is Cadillac at its very best. Cadillac 74, more than ever, America's #1 luxury car.
Now, depending on your own personal perceptions, you might think that the Cadillac car is obese, large, just, ridiculous, especially given the modern perceptions. There are some of you that maybe car buffs are going, man, what a sweet ride. My uncle used to be in the business, and he owned a dealership, and he'd get a new one every 3 years. And I mean, they were beautiful cars. I mean, very luxurious. Anyway, without going on, Cadillac, or GM, General Motors in general, during the late 70s and into the 80s, were facing some pretty stiff competition from Japan, and that they especially suffered in the quality of their particular automobiles. And GM started creating what was known as the unibody. And so the unibody meant that they created one body that could be used for Chevrolet, for Buick, for Pontiac, and unfortunately for Cadillac. Now, one of the difficulties with this is that, excuse me, is that the problem with that is that with a unibody that was the same as a GM, it's the same as a Cadillac or a Pontiac or a Buick, why are you spending 40% more money for a Cadillac? Okay? And probably the worst or the biggest offense was the Cadillac Catera. And there were other ones in the same item that in essence were using the same bodies from their lesser cousins, for a lack of a better word. And so this is an example.
There's a car out there people are talking about.
This is a bold move for Cadillac.
It's the only car in its class with the executive assistance of OnStar standard.
OnStar.
What is this boldly restyled car that's making the press take notice? It's the 2000 Catera. And now, you can get a Catera with a very attractive lease. Call for important lease details. The 2000 Catera, the power of and, the fusion of design and technology. Cadillac.
Now, the problem with that is that if you look at it, it's a Toyota, or whatever you want to call it, all right? And the difficulty is that it eroded a great brand, and it was a very bad mashup, and Cadillac suffered mightily from it. And in the space of a couple of years, this is looking at the end of the unibody mindset, and where Cadillac finally decided it had to reposition itself. And so they decided they wanted to return, especially not only to luxury, but to engineering. And it sounds like they wanted to consider themselves more in the BMW variety. And if you look at the CTS and STS, you say that's true. But then again, you look at the Cadillac Escalade, and you see that they're also they're once again a straddle positioning between those unique models. And so in 2003, they launched a Super Bowl ad, and it in essence was a redefinition of Cadillac into the modern world using the CTF as its flagship. Now I'm going to show you this Super Bowl commercial, and I want you to notice the symbolism of Cadillac through the ages, and that this is the natural progression going on.
Could have seen it coming. Cadillac. Breakthrough.
It was a great commercial, relaunched Cadillac as a brand. It's kind of interesting also if you look at it, the brand itself or the commercial itself, if you notice that when he got in, he had on a hat, a tie, he's getting out, and he's a much more individual in the millennium. Interesting note, by the way, that he had a hat. Hats actually were a standard piece of equipment that men wore all the time, and then in 1960 went away completely because in the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, he didn't wear a hat, and hats went out of style overnight. Okay, so last thing in a discussion of positioning is that there are alternatives to basically positioning, okay? So if you don't necessarily wish to, talk about rather the attributes and the benefits, sometimes what you want to do is position the brand in a narrative story, okay? And so by that, what I mean is that some brands are more ideally suited for having in essence, a story of it, especially when they're products that have a richness and they have an imagination. There's a literary description of this product that it has beyond just merely one benefit versus the next. And an example of certainly is liquor in any form that requires more than just a discussion about taste. And so an example is this, is creating a brand story. And this is what's also known in social media as native advertising. And so basically what you have is you have a setting, like the time and the place and a context. And the cast, basically, the brand itself is a character in that play. All right. And the narrative unfolds over a given amount of time. And there's some actions and experiences. There's events. And then there's like a moment of epiphany when suddenly you realize, this particular, moment that it all coalesces together. I think if you look at the Cadillac commercial certainly showed that. There was a narrative in the story there. There was a natural kind of blending. And the story basically helps to reposition the Cadillac, okay? And you see basically the language the language itself usually comes down to symbols and themes, metaphors, and it's certainly, if you look at the individual getting into that subway, in essence, a creature of the mid-20th century, and he leaves as an individual who has made it to modern times. I think all of those kind of things come together, okay? It recognizes basically that, companies build iconic leadership brands, and they have a cultural knowledge, and they need to be able to use those to, in essence, bring about and show a structure around the strength of this particular brand, that it is more than just merely the throwing together of ingredients, and basically it says that there's something deeper than this. They call it brand wikification, if you want to come up with a word. They talk about, wikis basically are contributors from all walks of life who add to a given story, and this is an example. If I could, let's see if I can come up with one. Let's see if I can come up with an example. Let's see. And so this is an excellent example. And this is one you've seen before. And this is Jack Daniel's Our Town. And it really, in essence, boils down the heart of the product as being the product made from the contribution of all of these individuals.
This is Lynchburg, Tennessee. This is how many people were born here. This is how many are fifth generation. This is how many are named Hiawatha Kitty McGee. These people have served their country. This is how many will still be in town when the football team plays at Huntland. She's from Taiwan. He's German. This guy keeps the town dry. These guys would prefer it a little wet. This many have ejected from an SR-71 Blackbird and lived to tell about it. He can lift a 500-pound barrel of whiskey. These are the descendants of Mr. Jack Daniel himself. This is how many people are proud of what we do here. This is how many will go around bragging about it. This is our town. For 150 years, the home of Jack Daniels. If you can't get here, just look for one of our postcards. We send them all over. They look like this.
And so, wonderful commercial. And it just about states exactly what you're kind to approach, that alternative approach of positioning by telling a wonderful story. Okay? All right. So, the last thing to talk about just briefly is how do we go about positioning for small businesses? You know, the challenge of small businesses has to do with the fact that they have limited resources and budgets. And yet, there are enormous success stories that come about from small businesses becoming big, and it's being able to take what they have and maximize it to their best benefit. If you've just followed some basics, find a compelling product performance advantage. It doesn't have to be just one, okay? Some unique thing about your product, okay? Focus on building those one or two strong brands based upon one or two key associations. It doesn't have to be much. Important, absolutely important, is to encourage trial. Get your consumers to use it, all right? And if they can use it, then they will buy it, okay? Develop a cohesive digital strategy because, folks, digital strategy is the great equalizer, all right? Learn how to create a positive buzz, understand social media, learn how to employ guerrilla marketing, and leverage as many of those secondary associations. In other words, all of those extra advantages as many ways as you possible. And remember, you can always conduct low-cost marketing research. There are ways of doing it from Mechanical Turk to just about any other way possible, and make sure your brand makes a difference. Okay? All right, we are finished with everything that we need for our first test. Folks, the test will be starting on Monday. Let's go look at our calendars, everyone. And so the test will start on the 10th. I will let it run to the 11th. And I will start it at 8 in the morning on the 10th. And I will let it finish to 8 o'clock at night. 10 o'clock at night on the 11th. The test will be approximately an hour and a half, 90 minutes to complete. It will be 30 questions, multiple guess. There will be 5 essay questions worth 8 points apiece. As I said before, please study the work because it'll make it that much easier for you to do the test, okay? Don't leave any of the questions blank if you can. You know, especially the essays. I will accept anything. Well, I mean, I'll give you at least partial credit, okay? I'm going to try. I'm caught up with a lot of things right now, folks. But if I can, I'll try to put out a dummy test during the weekend, maybe 5 questions. So for those of you who wanted to just practice on 5 questions to see what it's like, I would try to do that, okay? All right. So, folks, I will be seeing you on February 12th, and I hope you have an excellent weekend, and I will see you soon, okay? Bye.